Yeah, if you're thinking Gettysburg right now, that would be your best choice.
Great. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Holland Land Office Museum, to our guest speaker series. We're getting towards the end of the year here, but we're very happy to have a special presenter here tonight, all the way from Virginia. He made the trek up to see us. Probably any other year it'd be much harder travel than it was this year, but we've been lucky so far. So Michael Block is with us tonight. This is his third time presenting with us, so he's becoming quite a regular. But we're very happy to have him back. He's written a book, The Carnage Was Fearful, about the Battle of Cedar Mountain, which he's spoken about before, but he's also been published in Blue and Gray magazine, Hollow Ground, North and South, amongst many other things. The list is too long to bore you with right now, but he's here to discuss the Battle of Kelly's Ford and Rappahannock Station, which is sort of an important benchmark in our own Emory Upton's career. So there's your local connection for tonight, but I will let Michael delve much more into that, and since that's who we're here to speak. So Michael, all right, Ryan, thank you very much.
Well, good evening. Good evening. It's always a pleasure to come up here. I enjoy coming up to upstate New York. When we were originally scheduling this, we were looking at October, early October, and my wife was really excited because she'd come up here and see the leaves and the changing of the season. But that didn't work out, and so we're here on November 7th. Look at that. November 7th, 1863, November 7th, 2024. The 161st anniversary of the Battle of Rappahannock Station. So that worked out pretty well, too. So we'll have a good time tonight. We'll talk about a fight that people really don't know a whole lot about. Okay. Come on. Let's turn it on. There we go. This is my disclaimer that I like to show. Let me hand out some maps as you read through that. This is not my fault. I was not alive when this battle took place, contrary to what my granddaughters think.
I like that.
3, 4. Ryan, we're going to... What part of Virginia are you from? I'm from Orange. Could you get Ryan to print out 5 more copies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, sure.
Okay, all right. So, we'll see if we get some more copies. I've got one more sitting here. So I'm from Orange, Virginia, which is just south of Culpeper, which is just south of the Rappahannock Station area. So Rappahannock Station, like Mine Run and the Bristow campaign, are small fights that take place in 1863, after Gettysburg and before the Wilderness and Overland campaign. And you don't hear a lot about these because you have Gettysburg and the Wilderness, and so it kind of falls in between there. And I always kind of call them campaign of maneuvers or a campaign of missed opportunities. Neither Robert E. Lee, Confederate, the general in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia, or George Gordon Meade, Army of the Potomac, want to lose a fight. It would be really bad for either of them to be significantly defeated. So it's not that they're looking for a win throughout the fall. They're looking for not to have a loss, which I always thought was kind of interesting. So by early November, in 1863, the Bristow campaign has ended. That was Robert E. Lee trying to make a far sweep around the Federal Army right, kind of recreating what Lee did during the Second Manassas campaign in 1862. That didn't work. There was a small fight at Bristow Station where A.P. Hill, Powell Hill, kind of got smacked around a little bit by the Federal Army, and the Federals were able to get up into the fortifications around Centerville, Virginia. Lee realized that he could not get to Meade's army in those entrenched positions, but he also realized that we are now in the 3rd year of a war in Northern Virginia, and there's nothing there for the armies to eat. The countryside had been completely stripped, and so he's going to retreat. And one of the things he does is when he retreats is as he backs down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad from the Manassas Bristow area back across the Rappahannock. They're tearing up the railroad, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, trying to buy time for the Army to get away and force the federal government to rebuild this railroad. What they don't bend, they actually pick up, put on wagons, and carry south across the Rappahannock, because it's really hard for the Confederate government to make railroad iron. They're using a lot of their iron now to make weapons and artillery, and so getting railroad iron is really tough, and so they actually just pick it up and leave. What I learned over the years is, did you know that each piece of rail has its own number? And it's an inventory. And so after the war, the owners of the Orange and Alexandria and the B&O went looking through the South trying to find the rails that had been absconded by them during the war, and they said, we want this stuff back. So again, what wasn't bent was taken away, and by November 2nd, they were pretty much back to where the armies had been. Lee was back across the Rappahannock River, with the exception of, okay, there they are. With the exception of a small tetapon, a small position across the Rappahannock River on the north side at a place called Rappahannock Station. It's today's Remington if you look on a map. Lee's plan is to hold this position and hopefully spend the winter in Culpeper County. They're going to build camps and just kind of settle into winter quarters there. It's getting late in the year, it's in November. Not a lot of campaigning takes place in the late fall and the winter because of the weather. We don't have asphalt roads, so it's just, Ryan, just in the back.
Okay.
They don't have asphalt roads, so any kind of rain or anything, we're gonna have a mud problem here. What he's done with this position here on the Rappahannock is this position was originally built in 1862 to protect the railroad bridge crossing the Rappahannock here. When the Federals came through in the spring of 1862 and took over some of this area, they turned the works around to face the south. And this happened throughout 1862 and for a good part of 1863. Anytime the Army reoccupied that position, they changed the earthworks back and forth again. So while they may have looked formidable, we'll talk about them a little bit, they were starting to look a little run down as well because they kept changing the way things were looking at. Lee wanted to use this position on the north side of the Rappahannock to strike Meade if the opportunity presented itself. He wanted Meade to cross the Rappahannock. 3 miles above this position and 5 miles below are wonderful fords, Beverly Ford, which played such a key role in the Brandy Station campaign, and downriver, Kelly's Ford are good fords to have armies cross. Lee was actually hoping that they would try to cross at one of these fords, and using this as kind of that fulcrum, turn north or south and strike the federal armies as they're crossing.
Yeah.
That's his plan. Not going to work out for him that way. Let's go back one. This is actually a photo taken in the late fall of 1863 of Confederate camps in Culpeper County. Lee begins building winter quarters between Brandy Station and Stevensburg, which is about 6 miles south of the river, and south at Kelly's Ford at a place called Paoli Mills, in preparation of the end of the campaign season. Details are going out daily to cut down trees to build these cabins and prepare the lumber that they need for the winter. There's another view of the redoubt above Rappahannock Station. Just below where the river crossed, the bridge had been torn down. The railroad bridge had been burnt or torn down 3 different times during the course of the war. And in November 1863, it's down at this time too. And there's a pontoon bridge across it. At a period of time, the railroad had water towers, water tanks there to support the engines there. So here's our situation in early November. The Federals are now back in southern Fauquier County in position to strike as ordered when the time comes. John Sedgwick's Corps is going to be up in Warrenton, about 15 miles from Rappahannock Station, George Sykes' Corps was along a spur called the Warrenton Spur. Second Corps, Governor Warren, and Third Corps, William Blinky French, are down in an area near a place called Warrenton Junction. It's today's Calverton. And First Corps under John Newton is farther back. The cavalry under John Buford, Judson Kilpatrick, and Irwin Gregg are supporting the Army in various locations. On the south side, I have the divisions really of Lee's Army. Remember, he is short one full corps with James Longstreet in Tennessee during this time. So he's got his 6 remaining divisions scattered along the Rappahannock in kind of a defensive position. Before dawn on November 6th, 900 men of Brigadier General Harry Hayes' Louisiana Brigade marched from their camps to Rappahannock Station, replacing the Stonewall Brigade in that Tetapon. Joining them was the Louisiana Guard artillery. Hayes' men had shown the effects of hard campaigning. The captain in the 6th Louisiana is going to write, Joseph Davis is going to write, they want at present shoes, blankets, pants, shirts, drawers, socks, and overcoats. For the want of such, they complain much. I think if I was without shoes, pants, shirts, underwear, socks, and overcoats, and a blanket, I would be complaining too. So these guys have had a very hard campaign season. They've marched in there. A portion of the brigade goes forward as skirmishers, and they're going north there, and they're expecting 3 uneventful days, just like everyone else has had 3 uneventful days, holding this position for the last two weeks. The fortifications, while seeming imposing, were not. The rifle pits were, by this stage, were neither deep nor wide. The 2 earthen redoubts were not protected by any obstructions in the front, no abattis or any other kind of defenses. The entire trench line was commanded by a higher ridge several hundred yards in front. So they were at a lower elevation than some of the surrounding area, behind which the enemy could mass unseen, and that's exactly what's going to happen. On the right, the railroad approaches the river on an elevated embankment, and a tunnel through it is a passage for a road just in front of the work, so they're blind on their right as well. The railroad embankment partially concealed an advancing force until it charged through the tunnel or over that embankment. In his after-action report, Major General Jubal Early, whose men are going to be fighting here, spends 9 paragraphs describing the works and the problems therein. Early and his men did nothing to improve the works. Downstream at Kelly's Ford, Major General Robert Rhodes had the unenviable task of defending the indefensible. Fauquier County side of the fort is much higher, with the opposing force can rain fire down from its northern embankment. Complicating position, Mount Holly Church Ridge, and I'll show you that in a minute, is an artillerist's dream. Artillery fire could not only interdict the ford, but all the roads leading to it. So any movement to the ford is going to become under artillery fire. Rhodes is going to place the 2nd North Carolina Infantry of Stephen Dodson Ramser's brigade in the rifle pits in the abandoned villages of the village of Kellysville. The 30th North Carolina is there for nearby support. Captain John L. Massey's Fluvanna Artillery was positioned on a hill above the ford to provide any kind of artillery support to that position. Massey, with a keen sense of the terrain, realized that if he had to abandon his position any time, would have to move forward towards the ford in open fields to get away. So what he's going to do is he's going to have his men in the interim build a artillery road, a military road in the trees, so if something happens, they can get away. And it's something they're really going to have to use. Bad position for these guys. Meade is reluctant to advance on the Rappahannock at this time of year. When he is pressed by the national government, the Lincoln administration, to move forward to continue this campaign season, Meade proposes that I'm going to take my army, slide it down the river to Fredericksburg, and cross at Fredericksburg. Well, that looks good on paper, but for Abraham Lincoln and Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, their memories immediately come up of the Battle of Fredericksburg the previous December and what happened with Ambrose Burnside. and they say, no way are you gonna slide down and you go to Fredericksburg. You either have to go across the river at Rappahannock Station or try to go around Lee's left, going farther to the north and west from that position. Going farther north and west takes Meade farther away from his supply line, so it's not an option. He's actually stuck with going right at Lee at Rappahannock Station. Accordingly, on November 6th, Meade issues orders for the morning movement. John Sedgwick is ordered to march his 6th Corps towards Rappahannock Station, placing it on the left of the railroad above Beverly's Ford. Sykes' 5th Corps is going to come down from Warrenton Junction and be on the Rappahannock side of that railroad, on the left side, on the left side, adjacent to the 6th Corps. Sedgwick is given command of both corps, so we have a change in leadership structure the night before battle. At Kelly's Ford, the same thing happens. William Blinky French, he was called Blinky because his eyes blinked a lot, because he liked to imbibe in alcohol. So he had that reputation. He's put in charge of 2 corps as well. His 3rd Corps and Governor K. Warren's 2nd Corps are going to move from the Catlett, Warrenton Junction area down to Kelly's Ford. Meade is going to set himself up in his headquarters in a house in between those 2 locations and play no direct role in the fight. And he's actually going to be communicating with his senior subordinates via telegraph that's been set up, field telegraph that's been set up from his headquarters. So he's not even present at these fights. He has dictated how he wants his leadership to fight these fights, and he's counting on them to implement the action as they see fit. So it's kind of a bold move by Meade to not be in direct control. The plan is very simple. French is to occupy the heights above Kelly's Ford at Mount Holly Church and, quote, attack him vigorously, throwing your whole force upon him, drive him from his position. So he wants the south side of Rappahannock, he wants the south side of Kelly's Ford. Sedgwick's orders were similar, but not the same. Reaching Rappahannock Station before sunset, the enemy should, if practicable, be driven from this side of the river at once. After forcing a crossing, both Sedgwick and French had orders to link up in the vicinity of Rappahannock Station. So very simple, get across the ford, move in towards the Brandy Station area, link up, and then we'll see how the game plays from that point on. The weather on November 7th was clear and a little warm. The actual high that day was 62. So it was a pleasant day. The problem was, and what's going to have a significant impact on the battle, is there was a strong wind from the southwest, so blowing from behind the Confederates over the river, over the Confederate position towards the Federal position. At dawn on the 7th, much activity was in the Federal camps. Henry Siege of the 4th Michigan rose at 4 a.m. and prepared for a march. Started at 7 a.m. John Haley of 3rd Maine, the 17th Maine, the 3rd Corps, penned, "We were up till midnight the night before drawing rations, and we hardly appreciated being called to turn out at 4 a.m. But it was at that hour we put our shoes on, having orders to march at 7. For once, it can be said to the credit of General French, he was ready to start at the planned time." And that's true. I think this is going to be Blinky French's best day of fighting. So they started marching by 7. 4 hours later, both columns have reached their objectives. Skirmishing commences with the rebels slowly giving ground. At Kelly's Ford, the first U.S. sharpshooters, those guys in green, were tasked with pushing the enemy back and across the river, which they accomplished. North Carolinians make a brief stand before being forced back. At Rappahannock Station, the Louisianians withdrew as Sedgwick's men approached. Sykes approached along the railroad and didn't have any real opposition. When the Federals appeared on the hills to the north and northeast of the Louisiana position, Colonel Davidson Penn, commanding the brigade in Hayes' absence, sent couriers to Early, informing him, hey, they're coming. The first message went south at 11:45 a.m. and the second 90 minutes later. So 11:45 and 1:15. Early received the first courier at around 1:30. So it took that long for the courier to get back and find Early, stating that infantry and cavalry were advancing in force. Early forwarded the message to his senior commander, Richard Jewell, and to Robert E. Lee, and without waiting for orders, taking the initiative, ordered all of his brigades to the river. Robert Hoke's brigade of North Carolinians, commanded by Archibald Godwin, was the closest. Unfortunately, when the word came to move out, the brigade was scattered in the woods, chopping down trees and building their cabins. So they had to gather their men together before they could even move forward. The brigade consisted of 3 regiments, the 6th, 54th, and 57th North Carolina. When that brigade was recalled and they had a sufficient force available, they moved off to Double Quick. Double Quick is kind of a jog or a run. It's 6 miles from where they were camping to Rappahannock Station, and they jogged the distance to get in position. Early rode on ahead and was overtaken by Lee, who had not yet received the dispatch, but was close in the area. And so at 3 o'clock, both of them reached the Rappahannock. There's a high hill on the south side, and Lee puts himself up there to observe the situation. And Early crosses over on a pontoon bridge. It's the only way, there's only a single pontoon bridge between the 2 sides of the river. Early crosses over to take a good look at the situation and realizes that it's a good thing that his men are coming up because they're going to need help pretty quick. He realizes that Penn's force, the Louisianans, are manifestly too small for the lengths of the work. He needs more men up here, and so he's counting on Godwin. He returns back across the bridge to the south side and goes up on that high bluff to observe the developments. Godwin's men arrive at 4 o'clock, 2.5 hours after receiving the summons. You know, today we can drive those 6 miles in less than 10 minutes. 2.5 hours it took them to get there, cross the river, and to get in position. So with Lee's concurrence, the Tar Heels would go across and join Hayes, who had arrived and assumed command of the Tetapont there. Lee directed no more men to cross. Hayes wasn't originally there because he was serving in court-martial duty in Culpeper, so he had a 12-mile ride to get up here. Lee is still hoping that as the Federals are going across at Kelly's Ford, because he knows that's going down, and we'll talk about that here in a second, that he can still take that force at Rappahannock Station and move down and strike into the Meade's flank. He still has high hopes of success there. So let's get back to Kelly's Ford and talk about this. These are the Confederates that are down there. Robert Rhodes, the second North Carolina is the group that is down along the river, and the 30th North Carolina is there for support. And there's the movement to the river. So we're going to move to that map now to give you an idea. The Federal Cavalry under John Buford and Judson Kilpatrick are moving to fords up above the battlefield and below the battlefield to secure those flanks, to get across at those fords down there and put pressure on the Confederate flanks. Here's the Federal leadership at Kelly's Ford. David Bell Birney, John Henry Hobart Ward, great name, and Regis de Troyes and a Frenchman. Because French has been elevated from the 3rd Corps Command to kind of lead an operational maneuver group of 2 corps, Major General David Birney is now the temporary Corps Commander, which means that John Hobart Ward is now the division commander, which means that Regis de Troyes is now a brigade commander. So everyone's kind of had to move up in the position. Civil War, you don't have staffs where you have assistant brigade and assistant division commanders, so these guys take their staffs with them, and so there's a little bit of a breakdown in control. It's not going to impact this battle, but it does in other fights. Ward ordered the Troyes Brigade forward with the 1st U.S. sharpshooters leading the way. For the attack, the 20th Indiana and the 2nd U.S. sharpshooters were assigned to support the Detroit Brand. These 3 regiments lead the assault. Sharpshooters quickly drive the Confederates back along Marsh Creek and back to the river. The arrival of the Federals actually surprised the Confederates in this position. Here's where we are as this assault goes forward. Mount Holly Church up here, Mount Holly Church Ridge up here is an imposing hill. And in 1863, many of these trees are gone. That artillery piece under Massey is on top of this hill out here, and it's a straight shot, open fields right down to the river. And like I said, he had some trees behind him that's gonna save him. The second North Carolina guarded Kelly's, but also Wheatley's and Stevens Ford. Stevens Ford is up river here, and Stevens Ford is down here, and Wheatley's Ford up there. So these 322 men have a frontage of 2¼ miles, almost impossible to defend. The 500-man 30th North Carolina, under the command of Colonel Sillers, earned supporting distance in the reverse of the hill where Massey's guns are, but they have orders not to come to their comrades' aids. Remember, Lee wants the Federals to come across the river. So the plan is for the 2nd North Carolina to take that hit and withdraw as they can, with the 30th right there to stop them as everyone else comes up to their support. It's not how it's going to work out. While the sharpshooters were clearing the Fauquier side of the river, Captain J. Henry Sleeper's 10th Massachusetts and Franklin Pratt's 1st Connecticut Heavy Artillery are positioned on Mount Holly Church. You can see where they are with a direct shot down into the Confederate positions. And John Buckland's Battery E, 1st Rhode Island's on a hill above the ford. And again, they have a clear view of the ford and the Rappahannock Station Road. All three of these artillery positions dominate anything the Confederates can place. This all goes forward to about 12:30. Captain William Batchett, a member of J. Hobart Ward's staff, wrote a letter to a military comrade who had just left the brigade. Typically, a Civil War letter is from a soldier to his family back home, and it's going to say something like, Dear Mom, I am fine, the weather's been good, had a fight, I came through okay. And that's all you're going to get about a battle. But this is a soldier to a soldier who is intimate with the men in this command, and this is what Batchett writes. The ball opened rather briskly. We brought up the 3rd Brigade to support our advance, and also the 1st and 2nd Brigades and Randolph's Battery, which was soon in position and doing good execution. We pushed them strongly, and General Bertie ordered 6 of those large 30-pound cannons to open up on their reinforcements, which were seen coming down at a dead run. They cooled their ardor, and we pushed their front line through and over the river, when they took refuge in the rifle pits just on the other side. General Ward decided to make short work of it, and he ordered the sharpshooters, 20th Indiana and 40th New York, to go over the river on a double quick to take these works. And away we went with one of their unearthly yells. You can imagine the boys just going through the river nearly waist deep. Old Hobart Ward on his white horse at the head of them, and of course we, with his staff, had to follow the old gent, although the Johnnies were playing ball rather briskly. We soon had him in a tight place. We went over by division, doubled up on center, and deployed as soon as we went over. They went over compact. As soon as they went over, they spread out. We took over 480 prisoners in one squad and drove the others flying right over the open plain to the woods. By the time it was dark, we rested for the night. The loss in our skirmish was 10 killed and 60 wounded in our division, and not a gun was fired by the other troops. You think he's proud of what he did? 10 killed, 60 wounded, and they got at least 480 prisoners? That's a pretty good afternoon. The 30th North Carolina, foregoing their assignment, rushed to the riverfront to support their fellow Tar Heels, but were unable to get in position. Rhodes, in his after-action report, was not kind to the 30th North Carolina. The 30th North Carolina, going to the assistance of the 2nd, was speedily broken and demoralized under the concentrated artillery fire which swept the ground over which it had to march. It arrived at the mill in great confusion and became uncontrollable. Many of the men refused utterly to leave the shelter of the houses when he ordered the regiment to fall back. All who refused were of course captured, and hence a large number of prisoners in this regiment. He's not happy. Lieutenant Sillers, who was leading their men down that ill-fated hill, was mortally wounded and is going to die the next day in Gordonsville. Rhodes had a higher opinion of the second. The second South Carolina behaved very handsomely. The loss of prisoners in this regiment resulted in Colonel Walter S. Starling holding his regiment in order to save the 30th, which had come to his relief on the left, believing that it had been engaged, which had crossed the rapids of the ford. The artillery fight was just as one-sided. Sleeper began firing on Kelly's Mill. There's a drawing of Sleeper's men, and there's Kelly's Mill, if you can see it right down there. But quickly changed targets when Massey opened up on his position. Again, that one single battery opening up. Sleeper replied to the challenge by taking the rebel battery in front, while Buckland joined in with solid shot from his position, striking its flank. Lieutenant William Pitt, serving in Massey's battery, described the barrage. I do not suppose men were ever in such hotter fire than we were. The ground around was literally plowed up by deadly missiles. The atmosphere about our heads was filled, as it were, with the warm, thick breath of exploding shells and shrapnel. Frequently, the explosions were so near I could feel the thick and heated air. Massey's men would suffer 3 mortal wounds, and 4 others, including Pennant, were wounded. He had to temporarily abandon his guns and took cover. And when the Confederates on the river finally began retreating, he returned to his guns and removed them from the field by the road he had the forethought to create. The fight here at the ford lasted about 30 minutes. French's wing expanded its bridgehead during the afternoon, and the Federals had advanced merely a mile inland along the Brandy Station and Stevensburg roads. 2 pontoon bridges were laid at the ford, and the remainder of the Third Corps crossed in dry feet. Edward Johnson's division of Confederates were called up to form a line of resistance, and they would remain in place throughout the night, withdrawing towards dawn towards Stevensburg. Got a couple of slides. Again, it's a wad drawing of Kelly's Ford that night. He captured those 2 pontoons down there, and you can see, if I can get this, there it is. You can see the town of Kellysville down there. This is where they crossed. They crossed the river and actually came down a steep slope across the river and into the town of Kellysville. The town of Kellysville, we're in these woods today. This is a view from the ford towards that ridge where the artillery was placed. It's about 600 yards away, and again, it dominates the Confederate position down here. Photo of Kelly's Mill, which is kind of hard to find these days. Couple holes in it. We don't know from this action or other actions. There's the ruins of the mill today. You can get in there in February, March, and early April. It's the only time of year you can get in there. Because after that, all those briars grow up. It's impossible to get in there. And then in October, November, December, it's hunting season. And this is part of a wildlife refuge, and you don't want to be a target. But as I'll show you in a second, you can see the mill race going right through here. Anyone heard or understand LiDAR imagery? LiDAR imagery is a kind of imagery that penetrates the tree cover, the canopy, and goes right into the ground. And so it shows you what the ground is. But it also, what it does is it shows you where ground has been compacted, so you know where old roads are. And you can find graves if you have a high enough fidelity. This is LiDAR imagery of the Kelly's Ford area. Marsh Run, this is that Sleeper Ridge right there. You can see how that dominates the plain above there. Some houses modern houses down there. But you can see these lines down here. Those are the mill races of the mill. That's where the water's coming from. This line over here, in the 1840s and 1850s, they built a canal along the Rappahannock River. And that's the old canal right there. So they had to negotiate the canal, and you remember where I said the U.S. forces, the sharpshooters, went across the river into Kellysville? Kellysville is right here. Look at that high bluff they had to come down just to get to the scene of the fighting. Here's a blow-up of the area a little bit better. Again, the mill itself is right here. And you can, again, in the wintertime, in that February, March time frame, if the weather's dry, you can actually go out and walk these mill races. And I've done most of this area and walked up here a little bit. Really fascinating. I haven't walked the canal yet. So this is if you know a little bit about LiDAR technology, it's really a benefit if you want to do some research. You want to find some old places. Is that it? That's it. Okay, so here we go. Let's go down to Rappahannock Station. I think you guys have a little bit of personal interest in Rappahannock Station here. This is the Confederate leadership at Rappahannock Station. It's under command. The division is commanded by Jewel Early. That's Davidson Penn, Louisiana, who's in charge of the Tetapont. Archibald Godwin is going to come on in with his North Carolina guys. And then the overall command of this is a man by the name of Harry Hayes of Louisiana. Godwin, for a period of the war, was also the commandant of Salisbury Prison Camp. Much reviled man. And after the war, the federal government went looking for him like they found Henry Wirtz in Andersonville. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to hang this guy. Unfortunately, the Federals got to him first. He was killed at 3rd Winchester, and he didn't know that at the time. So, just being shot meant you weren't going to be hung. The assault at Rappahannock Station is going to be under the overall command of David Russell. 2 brigades are going to be involved, Peter Elmaker and some guy named Emory Upton. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him before. This is, again, with Sedgwick stepping up to command 2 corps, 2 wings. Horatio Wright, and I'll go into this again, Horatio Wright is now in charge of the 6th Corps. David Russell is promoted from brigade commander to division commander now. And David Russell was Upton's brigade commander. And so as the senior colonel in the brigade, Emory Upton, this is going to be his first day, his first opportunity to be a brigade commander. He's going to make the most of it. We're going to talk about the 5th Corps first. That's that railroad embankment crossing the river right here with the redoubts up on top, and the 5th Corps is going to be fighting down in this area down here. They kind of have a unique mission, something I have not seen anywhere else in my Civil War research. They moved down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad from Bealton and arrived there about noon. Under the command of Brigadier General Kenneth Garrett, 33 officers and 900 men from the 3 divisions were selected, and they formed a skirmish line, a 900-man skirmish line, and that's the only thing that advanced along this side of the road. Their mission, they formed on the right the right was on the railroad, and they advanced about 3:30 in the afternoon. And as they moved forward, they also moved to the south and east, eventually reaching the Rappahannock River. So they sealed the river. The Confederates could not move or escape down that river. During the advance, the Confederate skirmishers withdrew to the works, and they, by the Federals extending themselves to the river, removed any chance of escape to the north of the river and thwarting any hopes of Lee had of moving down the river to cut Kelly's Ford. 900 men shut out Robert E. Lee in his attempt to flank the Federals. They just boxed them in. The same thing happens north of the river. Albion Howe and his brigade is going to seal the Kelly's Ford area. They had a few casualties up there, and I call those casualties up there by mistake because there was no heavy fighting up there. So a couple poor guys just got in the way of some bullets that were flying around. So Sergeant J.D. Potter of the 83rd Pennsylvania is part of this skirmish line. He's going to write 25 years after the event. Arriving at Bealton with 200 men, we proceeded to the scene of controversy. I love the way they write back then. The scene of controversy, where we were warmly welcomed as uninvited guests. Here, the officer in command, I have forgotten who he was, for some cause became unable to continue in command and turned it over to me. I don't want to play today, I'm going to leave. Together with his orders, which were to advance upon the front of the fort until we arrived at a place where an old house had been burned down and engaged the enemy. We went in and stayed too, until the chimneys came down with a crash. Fortunately, this was anticipated and no one was hurt, but it deprived us of all shelter and made staying undesirable. But still we stayed and kept on skirmishing until the 6th Corps took them in. The 5th Corps was 900 men, are going to have 7 killed and 22 wounded, and 4 missing. So out of 900, 33, not too bad, not too shabby from these. 5 batteries support this assault upon the redoubts, deploying on hills north and northeast of the Confederate position. The batteries began to engage almost as soon as they arrived and kept up a steady fire throughout the afternoon. Due to their position, it was difficult for that single Louisiana battery in the fort or 2 Virginia batteries who showed up on the south side to effectively respond. Hope they're not coming for me. Hayes reported the batteries on our right and another opposite our center, convergent on this point occupied for us, was rapid and vigorous until dusk. The Federals fired nearly 700 rounds toward the works prior to the infantry assault. At dusk, when the infantry advanced, the firing ceased. One thing to note, they talk about dusk. Sunset on November 7th is 5:08 p.m. And that's when this assault is going to take place. With Sedgwick elevated to lead the Federal right, his senior division commander, Major General Horatio Wright, took command of the 6th Corps. David Russell moved up from brigade to division, and his brigade senior colonel, Emory Upton, became temporary commander. Upton, born near Batavia, graduated from West Point in 1856 and began the war as an aide-de-camp to Major General Irwin McDowell. He later commanded a battery during the Peninsula Campaign and an artillery brigade during the Maryland Campaign. In October 1862, now a colonel, he assumed command of the 121st New York. I'm not going to talk anymore about Emory Upton because you guys know Emory Upton better than I do. So I'm not even going to try and compete with that one. Daylight's fading and Sedgwick was no closer to the Rappahannock than he'd been at Meade. He hadn't made that assault yet. Remember, Meade's order said if practicable. So Sedgwick is trying to decide if it's practicable or not. Uncle John, that was his nickname, became uneasy and asked his chief of staff, Colonel Martin T. McMahon, for the order a day, which was read one more time. Nudging his horse alongside General Wright, he asked, Wright, what do you think the chances are of an assault with infantry on that position? Wright evaded the question. Just say so, General. Sedgwick's still looking for an opinion. What does Russell think about it? Here's Russell, you can ask him for himself. Wright responded. So Russell joined him. The 3 of them are there now, and Sedgwick asked him, Russell, do you think you can carry those works? Okay, you're a temporary brigade commander. Now you're in charge of the division, and the boss is asking you, what do you think you can do? What's your answer going to be? I think I can, sir. Well, go ahead and do it. He had no choice. The 5th Wisconsin is, they are E. So they're down over here. This is a modern, obviously a modern map overlaid with where everybody was. The 5th Wisconsin is going to start, and Elmaker is going to start back in this area here along this small ridge line here. Captain James S. Anderson, commanding Company A of the 5th Wisconsin, described the ground over which they were to advance. Between our lines and the enemy were 2 long ranges of hilly ground with several hundred yards of broken declivity, between the bottom of which was a small stream. The first hill shut out the view of the enemy's works, but from the second crest, the enemy's line and the country on the other side were plainly visible. From the second crest, the ground, flat at first, sloped gently downward until right across the path and extended a swale or a ditch 14 to 20 feet wide with steep banks 5 or 6 feet deep, and the bottom was covered with 2 or 3 feet of mud. Tin Pot Run is what it's called. Crossing this, we came to a flat field covered with short stumps and undergrowth with brushy treetops, left by the troops who had cut down the timber for firewood. Next came a smooth, clear stretch, which evidently had been used for drill or parade ground by the troops encamped there. Then a sunken road. Next, a dry moat, about 12 feet wide and 5 feet deep. Then came a smooth upward slope, and at the summit, about 60-yard distance, were the earthworks. That's what it looked like before the homes were built out there. It's a long sloping hill right up to the top there. Throughout the afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Harris's 6th Maine held a skirmish line for Ellmaker's brigades. As the sun began to set behind the Blue Ridge, the 5th Wisconsin was ordered forward. To the rebels in the trenches, it appeared just a routine exchange of skirmishers. Something that's typically happened at the end of the day, get your new skirmishers in place, bring the other guys back, everybody settles down for the night, you order your DoorDash, whatever you're gonna do, and not go anywhere until tomorrow morning. So they didn't fire or react. But in reality, it was deception that Russell had planned all along. The 6th moved forward toward the redoubts until about 500 yards from the works. Then the Mainers waited until the Wisconsin men were in position, about 250 yards to the rear. At Russell's command, forward, double quick! The 6th Maine went up the slope and towards the works. Fire grew heavier as the line neared the works, and the men were struck down with fearful rapidity. Among the wounded was the 6th Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harris. To their left, across the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, the assault was observed by Captain Walter G. Morrell, Company B, 20th Maine. Morrell, top guys. Morrell had approximately 80 men in that skirmish line that were out there, and seeing his fellow Mainers go in, he shouted for his men for their support. About 50 followed him into the rebel works. Morrell's action is going to win one of the 3 Medal of Honors for the this day. He joins the men in the works. The Maine men would need all the help they can get. The Louisianans in the works were initially forced out of the trenches, but quickly rallied and were making hard work for the Yankees. Captain Rule Furlong, 6'6" school teacher, scrambled over the embankment and after emptying his pistol, seized the rifle, swinging it around his head until he was killed. The next morning, Confederate dead lay near him bore the wounds made by his rifle gun. Another early Yankee over the wall was Sergeant Otis Roberts. He was perhaps the first. Entering the works, Roberts realized that he was surrounded. Oops, I'm a little too early here. Called out his surrender. Immediately after, his comrades begin tumbling over the works, and he yells out, "I take it back!" Okay, didn't know you could do that. And he made a dash for the colors of the 8th Louisiana. In the after-action report from that unit, they wrote of what Roberts did next. Roberts, with only 5 men, rushed upon the color bearer of the 8th Louisiana Regiment, who in the midst of the color company, and after a hand-to-hand conflict in which the bayonet was freely used, succeeded in capturing the colors, compelling the whole company to surrender. Roberts also was awarded a Medal of Honor for his action this day. Anderson, the man who described the ground, also described the Badgers' advance. Then rose from that line of battle a terrible shout. Not the usual charging cheer. It was a yell of rage, a shout of encouragement, an implication of vengeance all in one. Only one shout, then a terrible silence. Significant silence. They had no breath to waste. Through a storm of bullets rushed the 5th Wisconsin to the rescue. A terrible and indescribable struggle ensued. It was hand to hand and foot to foot. The men of Maine and the men from Wisconsin with a bare semblance of organization fighting side by side. Ellmaker's 2nd line, consisting of the 49th and 119th Pennsylvania, surged behind the Badgers and followed them into the works. On the federal right, November 7th marked the first day that Upton commanded the brigade, and he's going to make the most of it. His brigade formed 2 lines behind that small rise in hill position since he arrived on the field. As the sun was setting, they moved forward about 1,000 yards and halted. Upton's men were in a good position to advance. Upton's men are going to come out of the trees, if they were there in the 1860s, towards him. That's the position from behind the Confederate line. Upton later wrote, "General Russell ordered me to bring forward 2 regiments to his assistance. I instantly ordered the 121st New York and the 5th Maine, and to avoid delay, ordered them to load while marching. This done, told them we were wanted to help hold the works captured, and they took double quick and soon arrived to support our hard-pressed comrades. Russell pointed out the rifle pit from which the enemy was maintaining an enfilading fire and ordered me to charge the rifle pits and hold it. The works were on a summit of a gently rising knoll. Their banners could be plainly seen against the sky, with their saucy heads appearing everywhere above the parapets, forewarned us of how deadly this task might be. Upton's aide-de-camp, Frank Morris, describes the assault. We dashed up to the threatening line of works regardless of the storm of balls that passed through us, pressed on, and were soon on top and then in possession. It was quite dark, and the enemy could not see the smallness of our numbers. At this point, when our regiments had charged their front and were about to make a dash on the rebel line in the flank and rear, Upton, in a loud voice enough to be heard by the enemy, cried out, "The first line will lie down when fired on. There are 3 others to support them." In fact, we had one small line of battle, but the enemy, hearing this and thinking themselves outnumbered and overpowered when we made our vigorous charge at them, surrendered at discretion. From 5:08 till 5:30, this battle is going to take place. By 5:30, it is pitch black out there. I've been out there during that time. You got to go out there at that time and see the battle. So it's amazing how quickly it got dark. Not everyone made the assault, went into the trenches. Dr. Isaac Holt, the surgeon for the 121st New York, described his experience. Until the very moment of scaling the works, Dr. Slocum and myself were with the troops, and I say, for once at any rate, I felt it uncomfortably crawling through the very mouths of those guns which were throwing forth iron death into our little line. Not finding it in my card of instructions to storm the fort without a gun or any other article of offensive weapons, I concluded to remain outside while the others reaped more glory, and perhaps by going in. So some people had some discretion out there. The 6th Corps of North Carolina quickly depleted their ammunition. The Tar Heels fought with swords, bayonets, cloaked muskets, and bare hands. It was a bare-knuckle fight. A few soldiers managed to fight their way across the pontoon bridge, only to fall under a hail of enemy bullets. A few were cut down in the attempt. Others attempted to swim the river, but were forced to return to the extreme cold and the swiftness of the deep water. It had rained 2 days before, and the Rappahannock River, the Indian term, I think it's Algonquin, is rapidly rising river, and it does that. And that's what happened here on this night. Colonel Robert F. Webb commanded the 6th North Carolina, recorded the final moments that he commanded the regiment in his diary. I cannot describe to you the terrible anguish I endured at the thought of being captured, as gradually that host of armed men surrounded me. I knew my escape was impossible, and I thought of my loved ones, wife, children, home. Tears ran down my cheeks, the first I had shed during the war. I was aroused from my reverie by a stout arm grasping my shoulder. "Do you surrender?" "No, not to a private." "Are you an officer?" "I am." And I replied, "A colonel rode up to me." He was Colonel Edwards of the 5th Maine. "Do you surrender, sir?" "I presume I do," I replied, "as I have no discretion in the matter, already being your prisoner." General Hayes ran the gauntlet on the pontoon bridge under fire from the enemy. He would claim he lost control of his horse, and it carried him into Culpeper County. 2 of his regimental commanders reached the south side of the river by swimming. And I had the same thing when I read this about Harry Hayes. His horse got spooked, and he lost control of it and ran across the river. And I believed this for years. But as I got involved in another campaign called Mine Run, I'm reading an account of Payne's Farm, and there's a brigadier general there by the name of Leroy Stafford. Stafford had bought Hayes' horse after Rappahannock Station. So 3 weeks later, Stafford is on the very same horse. At Payne's Farm, the horse again bolted under fire. So I busted on Hayes for years, and I can't do it anymore because it actually is the horse's fault. So the horse got Hayes away. Smart horse, exactly. Major Walter Mather, commanding the 121st in Upton's absence, was ordered by Upton to seize the pontoon bridge, but the honor actually went to another. Corporal Henry B. Minicham and a detail from the 49th Pennsylvania arrived first. Mather approached and asked where the officer in command was. "Here I am," answered the corporal. "You?" "Yes, sir. Me and the bridge is safe." responded Minichan. Well, Corporal, I relieve you. With the bridge controlled by the Federals, the battlefield enveloped in darkness, the remaining Confederates, unaware of the true strength of the attacking force, but knowing their line had been penetrated in multiple places, quickly realized their situation was hopeless and began to surrender in mass. Hayes's report of the fighting concluded thusly. My men continued at their post in the works, fighting well to the last. It was only when the command was cut in two and the enemy in complete possession of the entire hill, any thought was entertained of falling back. Indeed, there was no effort made by any one of my command to recross the river until nothing else remained but to surrender. He's obviously not talking about himself. Many of them escaped by swimming or fording the river, and a few on the pontoon bridge. Lee and Early are watching this. Near sunset, they're still on that slope, just on the other side of the river. Go back here. Lee and Early are right here, and this is a great view of this area here. What's the next one? They observed the Federal advance in the fading light, but didn't realize it for what it was. The sun had just set, and the Federals never attacked at this time of day. Additionally, they couldn't see any firing from the attacking Federals because they weren't firing. They were ordered not to fire until they got into the works. Finally, any fire from the trenches toward the Federals was going with the wind, and Lee couldn't hear the firing. And he also couldn't see the muzzle flashes. He and Early have no idea what's transpiring just a couple hundred yards away, and they're observing it. They ride away, unaware of the disaster that's befalling their men. After the fighting ended, there was a couple attempts made by the Confederates to fire the pontoon bridge to deny the Federals their use. There's the bridge down there, and you can see some of those guys getting away. Post-war, at least two individual Confederates take credit for this action. This is from the Rockbridge Artillery. At 9 o'clock, General Early asked for a volunteer to burn the bridge. William Effinger's of Harrisonburg promptly volunteered to undertake it, and soon had the bridge in flames, the enemy not having fired a shot. Effinger was later promoted to lieutenant for this action. There's one guy who burned down the bridge. In 1893, Lieutenant Samuel Buck of the 13th Virginia wrote of his heroics on that night. Major Hale, General Early's staff, said, General Early has sent me to you to request that you destroy the bridge. He would not order you to do so. Of course, Buck felt it was a great compliment, as he was the youngest officer in that command. Canary in coal mine? So with 13 others, he moved forward. This is a quote here. I got down on my hands and knees and crawled up onto the bridge, and then got as close as possible to the ground, and snake-like pulled myself along and onto the flooring, crept from boat to boat, cutting every rope within a few yards of the enemy side of the shore. Having done this, I resnaked my way back to my crusty fellows and attempted to restart the fire from a previous attempt. In a few moments, it was enveloped in a sheet of flame. The enemy had to bring up a new bridge before it could cross. Again, written in 1893. John Sedgwick, the commander of the Federal forces on the north side of the river, is going to report in the morning of November 8th. The enemy attempted to burn the bridge in the morning. The bridge was damaged, but usable. So we got a couple promotions here for not doing anything. The haul was a rich one. Two Confederate brigades suffered nearly 1,700 casualties, 1,590 prisoners, 130 of them officers. Let me repeat that. 1,590 prisoners. They lost 4 guns and the caissons and equipment, 2,000 stands of arms, 7 battle flags, and the pontoon bridge. The recaptured artillery pieces had been taken by the Confederates at the Second Battle of Winchester, and the pontoon bridge had been captured during the 7 Days campaign. The cost of the assault was small. Elmaker and Upman's brigade suffered 69 killed and 256 wounded, with 1 man missing. Upton wrote to his sister a week after this action, stating proudly, "The works were carried at the point of a bayonet. The enemy fought stubbornly for their colors, but were overpowered. Upton's men captured 6 colors bearing the honors such as Cedar Run, Manassas II, Winchester, Harper's Ferry, Sharpsburg, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg, and the Rich Hall. Lee and Early had departed to the south side of the river just as the federal assault was getting underway. The strong wind from the north and darkness denied them the sight and sound of the fighting. Neither realized what was happening until the fight was over. Major Walter Taylor, Lee's adjutant, wrote at 9 o'clock, "The enemy advanced upon us at Kelly's Ford and Rappahannock Station, effecting a crossing at the former place, and rushed our men and captured the latter place, defending the bridge, overwhelmed and captured most of them. Thus, in a very few words, I tell you the saddest chapter in the history of this army. There were captured about 12 or 1,500 men and a battery of artillery. Miserable, miserable, miserable management. We are now on the outpost, and it's not the place exactly for the general commanding. No sleep tonight or tomorrow." The following morning, Lee's going to establish a defensive line in the middle part of Culpeper County. His left on the Rixleyville Road and the right resting on Mount Pony. Cavalry skirmish line was placed on Fleetwood Hill, but there was no more tripwire. Federal cavalry flanked both ends of Lee's army, and 3 full corps of infantry advanced in front of them, and the army in northern Virginia withdrew into Madison and Orange County on the evening of November 8th, never to return to Orange. They didn't retreat till after their baggage was safely across, and that was Lee's goal that day, was to get his baggage and as much supplies across. Meade had many enemies within his own army. And during the winter, the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War held hearings not only on Gettysburg, but also the actions in the fall. David Bell Birney, no friend of Meade, testified before the Joint Committee on what he considered a failure to follow up the victory at Rappahannock Station. "We advanced to Brandy Station," he wrote, he testified, "and although the enemy was in full sight, we halted and remained there. The enemy that night moved into Culpeper in their trains, and I'm of the opinion that if we had been permitted to advance, as my troops were in fine condition and eager to do so, we could have struck the enemy a very severe blow. Governor K. Warren was just as unkind. The whole of November 8th was almost wasted in useless and uncertain movements." Meade didn't want a decisive action. He wanted to clear the river, and he accepted that. So it's a campaign of lost opportunities. I always like this picture of Lee over here. It's taken just after the war. Library of Congress has this image, and I submit to you to go look at it and then blow it up. And I want you to look right here, because right there, somebody scrawled in chalk on that brick, "Devil." According to the Federals, this is where the devil lived. How's that for a slam? So, many attempt to place the fighting at November 7th as part of the Bristow campaign or the Mine Run campaigns. Others lump all this together with Rappahannock Station as part of a greater campaign of lost opportunities, or a very big game of tag. I agree it's all part of it. I agree that part of the bigger event, the event of Fall 63, but this is a singular event. Meade's reluctant to initiate a fight at Kelly's Ford and Rappahannock Station. He wanted to slide down to Fredericksburg and renew the fighting there with a secure line of communications, but was overruled by Lincoln. Another lost opportunity. Lack of aggression on November 8th possibly cost him a decisive victory. Lee was reeling from the previous day's events and held a temporary line just to send his supplies and moved it back across the Rappahannock. A clearly frustrated survivor from the 6th North Carolina wrote his governor, Zebulon Vance, not understanding the object of the last 2 months of fighting. "We traveled most of the night, and for the last 2 months, we traveled most of the night like 500,000 men had been in pursuit of us, and reached the south side of the Rapidan on the 9th, just 1 month and 1 day from the time we left it. What have we gained during these marches and countermarches? Nothing, as far as I can see." Lee was generally surprised by Meade's aggressive actions. He anticipated a crossing at Kelly's Ford, and he was prepared for it. He hoped it would happen. What he was unprepared for was the aggressive actions of Sedgwick and Russell. Launching an attack in the gathering darkness against a well-prepared position was without precedent. The strong wind coming from the south and the federal assaulting without firing denied Lee the visual and audible clues that something was seriously amiss. Jubal Early used that considerable ink in describing the failings of his position. He fails to mention any improvements were made on the Confederate works when the rotation in and out of works began. That's because from late October, when the works were occupied, until November 7th, there were no improvements. Less than a month later at Mine Run, that would not be the case. Meade's success won praise for his men by once again beating Robert E. Lee. Later in November, Meade would cross the Rapidan and unsuccessfully attempt to turn Lee's flank along Mine Run in Orange County. By not initiating an action there, he again gained great renown for his men for not making a futile attack against an improved position. The actions of November 7th didn't significantly alter the war events. The road to Richmond was not open, nor was there a crushing defeat on the Army in Northern Virginia. Lee was unable to strike Meade because as he crossed the Rappahannock. What this action did produce was access for a launching point, which would become the Overland Campaign of 1864. And with that, thank you for listening to Grandpa, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
Does, where they have the word ford, is that derived from the word fjord, meaning crossing?
Yes.
So that's...
So that's an Americanized or an English version of that term.
Exactly. So anytime you say ford, that's...
Yeah, and actually, before the war, at Kelly's Ford, Granville Kelly, the owner of that ford in that area, actually laid heavy boulders in the ground to help facilitate the crossing there. Of course, he collected a toll for crossing because he did that work. And also at Beverly Ford, for a period in the 1850s, there was actually a small bridge there, which was destroyed as the war began. So he went down through the river there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Other questions?
How did you catch your breath?
I
You're going so much, it's like, did you catch breath?
learned over the years when to breathe and when not. I've had to, part of my history was in the Air Force and as a government work. I did intelligence work, so I had to do a significant amount of briefings. And so you learn how to regulate your voice and your breath as you go forward.
Not good, but I couldn't probably.
Yeah, and I learned to modulate my voice. I learned that in the 4 years I was a Cub Scout pack master. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, you gotta be able to talk above them and let all that confusion. I appreciate you not running around like 8, 9, 10-year-old young boys and girls while I was talking, but you learn how to
Yeah.
project that way.
You're a parent there. Ah!
Yes, sir.
What was the infantryman's weapon? Was it a musket or?
It was a musket. It was typically a rifle, probably an Enfield
Okay.
or a Springfield, were the two most
Single
common.
load.
Single load. And so in the case at Rappahannock Station fight, Upton has his men loading as they're moving forward.
Yeah, they were quick.
Doesn't put the caps on the piece until they get into the works.
Sure.
So they don't fire, they don't discharge. Because typically when a man stops the fire, everybody stops the fire and the assault stops right there. And so that's not what Upton wanted, that's not what Elmwood wanted on the other side of the field. Both sides are using the same kind of weapon. Usually you're especially in the Confederate case, you're picking them up after battle. Any others? Come on, I drove 400 miles, you got any more questions?
Wow.
Them your grandchildren?
That's my grandchildren, yep. We went up to, we took them up to Radio City Music Hall last year.
Wow.
Took the train trip up, took them on a train day after Thanksgiving to see the Rockefeller Center area. Took them to that, took them to Macy's, so they could say they were at Macy's, because they just saw the parade the day before, and so, yeah.
Oh, wow, now that's a wow.
Yeah, so that was a memory for them. That was the whole idea, give them a memory.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you. We do have some books from the museum and from me, so if you are so inclined, come on up.
All right, well, thank you again, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Just to let everybody know, as you can tell by the decorations throughout the museum, Wonderland of Trees is here. Our opening night is Friday the 22nd. We've got a lot of fun happening. We have the DSP Jazz Trio playing music. We've got food from the Alabama Hotel, Batavia's Original, and desserts from a sweet ending bakery out of Attica. So we hope you all come out. Tickets are $20 or $15 for members, and the basket raffle will be going full effect. So that is just the kickoff of our holiday season here, so we hope that you stop by and see us. Have a good evening, everybody.
Okay,